Assalamu alaikum everyone. In this session, we will cover the various elements of fidelity with particular emphasis on the complexity of truthfulness, honesty, and the associated professional role based duties. So, if we were to Google fidelity, Google explain it as one's faithfulness to a person, cause, or belief demonstrated by continuing loyalty and support. So, when we talk about being faithful or loyal, just what does it mean? To be faithful is to adhere to vows, to embrace the covenants, to honor contracts, and lastly, to be honest. The other two terms, honesty and role based duties, are terms that most of us are familiar with. We basically know about their meaning, so our focus in the beginning is going to be on fidelity. So, as a professional, we are duty bound to some of the things that we are supposed to do. It is expected of us. For example, a lawyer is expected to defend his client. Similarly, a judge is expected to rule with utmost honesty. A doctor to decide what's better for the patient. This trust is the thread. It's a glue that is holding everything together. However, this trust is a very tricky thing. There isn't anything concrete about it. Consider the following scenarios. Whom would you rather trust? Would you have greater trust in someone who blindly adheres to each and every promise they make, no matter how trivial they may be? Or would you rather trust someone who relies on good judgment and wisdom to determine that? Also, consider yourself in a situation. Would you trust someone who insists on honesty to the point of cruelty rather than ever deceiving someone? Whom would you choose? Or would you rather trust that greater moral duty it lies in stopping to help an accident victim than in keeping a promise to meet a friend for coffee? All of this, all of these questions, they point to the tricky nature of trust and the fact that all of this trust, this fidelity, it lies in the gray area, and there aren't any concrete boundaries. For the world to work in a harmonious manner, promises and promise keeping play a vital role. So, this concept of promise keeping, it's one of the simplest concepts. If you commit to something, you do it. The trust that we are talking about previously is based on the ability of a people to keep to their words. There is something inherent and something that is deeply rooted in our moral values. Even if we talk about the political government model, if we talk about the most popular and successful systems, the political governance is built upon at least implied promise. Even if things aren't said out loud or explicitly, everyone knows what they're supposed to do or supposedly not to do. As per a survey conducted in Pakistan, 97% of citizens agree, at least implicitly, to abide by the constitution along with the various local laws. This means that fidelity and trust it plays a super important role in maintaining the broader harmony in this world. This inherent trust of the masses, it was stated by the famous scientist John Locke in his discussion of civil society. In his book, Second Treatise of Government, he stated that people agree to concede some of their natural rights, like individually punishing others who have transgressed against them, in exchange for greater security and stability. What it means is that the basic law that an eye demands an eye can be let go in a situation if the masses want to have a greatest stability, if the people they trust that the government or the police or the law or the legislature it's going to act and it's going to give them the justice that they deserve, they might not go for an eye to an eye. They might just let the police or the concerned organization handle the case for them. They will be willing to let go of their natural right of an eye to an eye for an eye. Instead, they would rather want the greater stability for them. So, in exchange for that, they would be letting go of that. Um, this fidelity based trust that makes for more civil society applies all the more vitally in personal and professional relationships as well. It is the glue that holds such relationship together. It is that thread. It's a very, very important thing in holding such relationships together. Promises are a moral foundation. Even if we talk about deontological theories, or even if we talk about aggregate utility, promises are there. They play a vital role. Surely social structures would collapse without having the ability to rely on, right? Take the examples of contracts. Contracts are basically the legally binding promises. Breaking them would result in severe consequences and penalties. Even if we talk about the development and maintenance of virtue, people who adhere to honesty are given a higher moral stature than those who casually break their promises. Therefore, promise and promise keeping lie a stringent moral foundation in our ethical world. So, this might bring up a question in our mind like, if promises are such a big thing, can we not just base a whole model of professional ethics on promise keeping alone? Well, no. It's because if only the moral life were so simple. The problem with promising can be divided into four main problems. Firstly, it's all about the casual nature of it. We throw our promises so casually without considering our words that they might not hold so much meaning to ourselves. For example, let's do lunch. I'll call you later. I'll be there in 5 minutes. These are all examples of throwaway promises that are frequently made but seldom kept. This leads to the commitment to conflict with too wide a range of competing moral consideration. If I'm telling you that I'll be there in 5 minutes, I might not be there in 5 minutes. Probably I might be stuck in a traffic. Probably this is just me casually telling you that you need to wait and I'll be there as soon as I can. But these words that I'll be there in 5 minutes, you're committing to something, and this brings about the casual nature of that promise that you're not intending to uphold it, you're not taking it in a very serious manner. The second problem is that our promises might compete with other promises. For example, if you're an engineer, what should you do, for example, when your promise to prioritize public safety conflicts with promises to the firm for cost containment? Should you use um, cheaper material just to confine the cost, or should you prioritize public safety and use adequate material and it might increase the cost to the project? Or if you are a physician, what should you do when your patient needs conflicts with his managed care contract? If your insurance doesn't cover, if you're a patient and your insurance doesn't cover your said needs, should the physician or the doctor, should he prioritize your needs and write down a dishonest prescription which is covered in your contract rather than being honest at that point? Or should he follow, which kind of the promises is he supposed to follow at that time? So our promises might compete with other promises as well. Thirdly, we aren't really careful with our promises, and we might make promises about things that aren't in our control. A famous one is that I promise to love you forever. This statement is paradigmatic. One can legitimately promise not to cheat or abuse. I can also promise to provide financial support, though of course not a particular amount, and to maintain a supportive nature. So, but I cannot legitimately promise that I will love you forever. Maybe down the road, in 20 years or maybe 30 years, I might not live up to that promise. But we aren't careful with our promises. Also, if you were to look at it from another perspective, if you're way too careful with your promises and you add in more qualifiers or conditional statements, imagine marriage vows that read, I promise to be faithful unless something more morally compelling or outside my control emerges. Now, you're being careful with your promises, you're being careful with your words, you're controlling each and everything. But your integrity is already compromised. Who in their right mind would read their marriage vows in this way, that they promise to be faithful unless something more morally compelling or outside his control emerges? So the more qualifiers that you add, the less compelling your promises seem. And lastly, and more importantly, what if there is a morally conflicting promise? Consider a case in which an otherwise perfectly reasonable promise wouldn't conflict with another moral principle. But consider a case where a friend loans you a pistol on your promise that you will give it back upon request. The friend shows up one day full of rage, having discovered his spouse in bed with someone else. He demands that you give him the gun. You obviously resist, for obvious reasons, but he proclaims you promised. The result is a clear conflict, a dilemma between fidelity and non maleficence. So, now what do you do? Do you complete your promise or do you not do it? So, this shows that promise and promise keeping isn't as black and white as we seem. Promises, they, they like trust, they aren't something concrete or quantifiable. You can't just decide the rule on when or when not to abide by the promises that you have just made. They also lie in the gray region. So, now that we have talked about fidelity, promises, and trust, let us move over to honesty and role based duties, the second part of our session. To learn about honesty, let us look at its counterpart, dishonesty. So, what exactly does it mean to lie? Ethics claim lying to either willfully ignore or give false facts. This willfully ignoring is known as lies of omission. You're omitting something willfully. And the other kind of a lie or the ethical lie is you giving false facts. This is lies of commission. You're committing to something wrong. But to think that only truth and false defines a lie, it's again taking things on a much baser level. The devil again lies in the detail. You can't just justify lying by truth and false. You can't justify honesty with just truth and false. There is a more deeper level to this. For this, I would like you to take this an example. For example, you're Joey Schlaum. You're like a normal person. You're sitting somewhere and you firmly believe that there are unicorns on the dark side of Pluto. You go on telling that to everyone else. Is this an act of you being dishonest? Are you lying? Think about it. Well, ethically, no, you're not lying. You may be stupid, an idiot, or naive enough, but as long as you genuinely believe that you're not lying, you're not lying, because ethically it all comes down to what you believe and what you tell your own self. This brings us back to the ethical definition of lying. It is a matter of ignorance versus willful deceiving. As long as you aren't deceiving anyone else and you know it, it can be any other thing, but ethically you will not be considered lying. So does that mean does that mean you can go around telling people the unicorns on Pluto just because you firmly believe that? Well, if you aren't acting unethically at that point, you sharing that information is not reasonable. I mean, shouldn't you get your facts straight before making